We will get right into the presentation just after 7 o'clock, and I see quite a few people have logged in now. So welcome along, everyone. Thank you for your time tonight. I can see a few people are just adding in. So you're welcome to turn your mics on if you want to ask any questions, or there is a checkbox that you can type in any questions as we go through the presentation, and we'll have plenty of time at the end to go through Q&A. So I've got my valued assistant Lisa beside me tonight, so she'll be just checking the questions as they come through. So we'll get right into it. So tonight's presentation is all about positive cash flow and how to calculate the income from an investment property. Very important to understand the cash flow and the real true net cash flow, especially in times like we're experiencing with not every property is growing in value, and we may need to hold on to those properties longer than we first anticipated. So understanding the income and making sure it is neutral or positively geared is going to allow us to give us the confidence to hold that property, and it's not really going to affect our personal income. So just briefly before we get underway, my little bit of bio about myself. So I'm originally from New Zealand, so been involved in investment property in New Zealand. Probably had investment property now for probably 30 years. So over the year I was renovating properties, built brand new, did a subdivision, small subdivision. So came to Australia in 2000 and sold everything in New Zealand and had to start again. So over here I've built new properties, high cash flow type properties, renovated older investment properties, so quite a mix. I'm currently a buyer's agent, so I now help other clients get into their own homes or into the investment properties. So a pretty broad background of experience in investment, and understand the numbers and the cash flow is really, really important. So three of the key things that we're going to learn tonight. The difference between the gross and net yield, really important. Quite often we see figures advertised for investment properties and it's the gross rental yield figure that's listed. But much like when we get paid from a salary, our employer pays the gross, and then the ATO take off the tax, and we get to spend the net income. So it's the net yield of an investment property that is more important than the gross. The second key thing we're going to learn tonight is those hidden expenses, not only the mortgage, but all those other holding costs. Very, very important. It's very easy to miss those costs. And before we make a decision on an investment property, we really need to understand the numbers and the cash flow as well. So we're going to cover some of those other expenses in a bit more detail, and make sure we've got a checklist that we don't miss any of those other expenses. And the third big thing is tax benefits. So if you're new to property investment, we get very good tax deductions for our investment properties, and the ATO treat investors reasonably well in terms of deductions. So it's very important that you're all over those figures, good quality accountant that understands investment property, because the tax deductions can really add to the income and the cash flow of the property. And as an investor, we want to maximize our return and get every last dollar out of our property. So capital growth is very important, along with cash flow. So understanding its true cash flow and looking to improve that cash flow is going to give us a much better return and value over the longer term. So we're going to just do a cash flow forecast now and just show everyone how to calculate the difference between the gross and the net yield. So I'm just using some very basic figures just to make it easy for myself to calculate, and we're going to show the difference between the gross and the net yield. Now I have a software program that I use that goes into a lot more detail that we are going to cover tonight, but this is a very basic example of how to truly work out the net cash flow. So this is using an example of a $500,000 property, renting for $500 a week. Now I understand we're probably not going to get 500 in the current market, but it's just a case study of an example for the calculation purposes. So if we were renting it for $500 a week, that would give us around about $25,000 gross income per year. So the way we calculate the gross yield is we take the annual rent, which in the case is $25,000. We divide it by the purchase price, $500,000, and then we multiply it by 100, and that gives us the gross yield. So 25,000 divided by 500,000 gives us, multiplied by 100, gives us a 5% gross yield. So you think in terms of borrowing funding, that will give you a bit of an indication of how the property will perform in terms of a gross yield. But more importantly, as I mentioned earlier, it's really the net yield that's going to give us a true income or expense for that property. So to calculate the net yield, we take the annual rent, so the 25,000, then we need to subtract the annual property expenses, and we're going to go through those in a bit more detail. But on that property, it's going to be somewhere around that $7,000 figure. So that leaves us with an $18,000 net rental annual income from the property. So now we divide the 18,000 into the 500,000 purchase price, multiply it by 100, and it gives us that 3.6% net yield. So now you can see the difference. You know, what advertised as a very positive cash flow type property, if we're borrowing money at 3%, 3.5%, the actual true net yield is really 3.6%. If it's a standard house, traditional house, the difference between the gross yield and the net yield is similar to the example that we've described tonight, not massively different. But when we're getting into these properties and community title type properties, so properties with body corporates or higher management costs, that can really reduce the net figure quite dramatically. So you see some of these properties advertised with very, very high yields. You've just got to be very aware, is that a gross yield? And the first question you've got to be asking is, what is the true net yield? And you really need to see those figures or be able to calculate those figures. So that was a fairly straightforward basic calculation you can fairly do on a calculator very quickly, just to estimate what sort of income or cost of holding to that property. So one big tip there is always remember it's the net yield that's really going to give us the true cash flow of the property. So I hope that makes sense. And I'm recording tonight's presentation, so we'll be sending out an email tomorrow, or at least we'll send out an email tomorrow with a copy of the recording so you can go back through it. So tip number 2 is the hidden property expenses. Very, very important. So we're going to run through each one of those and explain them in a little bit more detail. So the land rate, so that's rates, the council rates we pay on the property, very important, and they will vary from the property to property. So if you're not sure of the rates when you go at purchase time, you can do a council search or get your solicitor to do those searches. Water rates are very important. So depending on the type of property, will be depending on the amount of water rates. So if it's a freestanding type property, generally you'll have a water meter connected to the one property. You, as an owner, the investor, generally you'll pay the base water charge, connection costs and annual water charges, and then generally any excess water will be charged or paid by the tenants. But that's where the property manager is really important, because they need to be, recording the water meter when the tenant moves in and out, and look at the annual or quarterly or 6-monthly water rates bills. So just remember, you need to keep track of that and give those figures and check with the property manager that they are actually charging the tenant the excess water rates. Now, again, if you're in an apartment or a community title type property, it can get a little bit more complicated because they might not have water meters for each individual property. So there might be a number, a way they calculate the water rates. And again, you just need to speak to your property manager to find out what the tenant should be paying in terms of the water rates. Property management, so this is the real estate agent or property manager that controls the property. I think their role is very, very important. I've dealt with some great property managers recently, but in the past I've dealt with some really underperforming property managers. So don't begrudge paying a property manager, a professional, and I don't mind paying a little bit higher than standard fees if it's a really, really good property manager, because really they're managing your asset on a day-to-day basis, and their role is really critical. So for anyone new to property investment that's watching tonight, some of the roles that the property manager operates in is they'll advertise the property for rent. They'll give you a guide of what the market rent should be. Just remember, they're speaking to tenants and looking at other properties on probably a daily or weekly basis. So they're very over the market, or what's happening in the rental market demand. Their job is to screen the tenants when they make applications and check that the tenants have got good references, etc., and they're not in any ticker lists. And their role is also to do the property inspections. And when the tenant moves into the property, they'll do an entry report, so noting the condition of the property and any damage, take photos, and then when the tenant moves out, any further damage the tenant's responsible for. So again, very important role the property manager plays in the property. They'll sign the tenant up to the lease, they'll collect the rent every week or every fortnight or every month, and they'll pay that fee, less their management fees, into your bank account. They can also do things like pay the other property expenses, which I personally find works really well. So the property manager can pay your water rates, land rates, any other costs, and that way at the end of the financial year, when you need to provide those costs and incomes to your accountant for your tax return, if you've used the property manager to manage all those, they've got a list and they'll give you an annual expense and income statement, and it's very easy to just simply to give that to your accountant. So it just keeps it a little bit in-house. The other big role they play in terms of property is the maintenance of the property. So if it's a new property, it will be very low maintenance for the first few years. If it's an older property, it might be higher maintenance. So a little key tip there is if you're looking at investment property and getting started, older type properties, high maintenance properties can be a real burden. I've experienced both myself over the years, and those, as an example, those old timber type properties where they require a lot of upkeep, a lot of maintenance, a lot of timber repairs, a lot of painting, that can add hugely to your annual maintenance costs. So just when you're looking at investment property, especially if it's your first one, just look at how old the property is, what needs doing, and factor that into your cash flow as well. Again, the property manager quite often will have tradespeople on their database that they can recommend to make any repairs and maintenance items fixed. And what I personally find is the property managers generally have a good pool of tradespeople as well. So because they're using them on a regular basis, and they can make sure that the tradesperson doesn't overcharge, because they're giving them ongoing work. So I find trades recommended by property managers. Just recently had a development site that I sourced for one of my own clients, and I'm project managing the renovation project, and found some of the trades myself, but also a couple of the trades were recommended by the property manager, and they've actually turned out to be really good because they value the ongoing work and they know they're going to get paid on time. So again, a good experienced property manager is all over that sort of thing, hence their importance in the role. Maintenance, again, we need to be aware of that. Body corporates can really change the cash flow of the property. So it depends on the property itself. So we find those larger high-rise type apartments, the body corporates can really, get out of control in terms of cash flow. So body corporates can range anywhere from, $10 to $15 a week if it's a shared driveway on a low set type property, all the way up to sometimes up to $150 a week. So that's $7,500 per year, reducing your cash flow. So generally, those townhouses or older type, low set type units have a fairly moderate body corporate, might be somewhere between that $30 to $60 a week, which can be quite affordable. But once you get into those high-rise apartments, they're servicing lifts and pools, large garden areas. The body corporates can be quite expensive. The other thing you need to be aware of with body corporates is they have what's called a sinking fund. And this is part of your body corporate you pay into, a fund that they allow for maintenance of the property. So if you're looking at purchasing a property with a body corporate, you really need to delve into the body corporate manager and find out how much money is in the sinking fund. And is there any large expenses coming up? For example, if you're buying an apartment and it's got a rooftop swimming pool and the swimming pool's leaking, or it needs recoating, or the lifts are past the use by date, can be very, very expensive. So just one little tip there, especially again, it's the high-rise type apartments. Low-set properties aren't as susceptible, but just always be aware of the body corporates, and also just bear in mind that they will increase over time as well. So you just need to factor in that rate when you're doing your cash flow. Gardening of the property, so lawns, gardens, etc. So quite often we'll find with apartments or townhouses, they will have an on-site manager, and they'll take care of the gardens and lawns and it'll be part of your body corporate. But you just need to factor that in. If it's a low-set freestanding type property, you just need to stipulate in the management agreement with your tenant that the property manager will arrange whether the gardening is the responsibility of the tenant or the owner. So generally with freestanding type properties, the tenant will be responsible, but always make that very clear. If they're not the sort of people, that are going to maintain and look after the gardens, and you find that's not going well, you could always speak to your property manager about including a garden package into their rental figure as well. So that, again, with some of those older, larger type properties, big gardens can look great. It's a type of property may want to live in, but for investing, always bear it back to what are the numbers, what are the costs going to be. Accountant's role, again, is very important. So if you're a current employee and going into property investment, you may not previously had a need for a professional accountant, but once you start owning property and you're an investor and a business owner, essentially, an accountant can save you or cost you a lot of money. So again, what I would recommend is if you're sourcing an accountant for the first time or not happy with a current accountant, speak to other property owners, investors, or even business owners that have dealt with accountants, see if someone can be recommended. And when you have that meeting with the accountant, just ask them a few key questions. Do you have clients with investment properties? Do you believe in investment properties? Have you done cash flows for clients? What's the checklist of expenses I need to provide? At the end of the financial year, how long do you take to do a tax return? Another key factor for accountants is you'll generally find, and this is just from experience myself, at the end of the financial year, that's obviously their busy time, and it can get crazy hectic. So if you're using an accountant, what I would always recommend is give them a bit of notice before the end of the financial year. Ask them for a checklist of documents that you need to provide if they haven't already sent it out to you. Many accountants now with technology are very good at that, sending out a list, or you might have an accounting package such as Xero, similar ones like that now. That a lot of these online portals will take care of all the incoming expenses, or your property manager might have all that factors and information. But again, be on the front foot with the accountant and get your tax return, because this is money that's going to come back to you. So the sooner you can lodge your tax return every year, the sooner that money can come into the account, and you can use that to pay off other debt or put into your offset account. So again, rather than leave it to the last minute and go to the back of the queue, always just recommend be on the front foot, and always ask the accountant. They might not be aware of all the expenses, and that's where a checklist is really important. And ask them the question, is there any other expenses we can claim, personal expenses relating to, the property? And I'll ask that question because every dollar in your pocket is better off for your future investment options as well. So again, a good accountant is really important. Of course, part of their fee will be a tax deduction as well. So very important there. Quantity surveyor. So quantity surveyor is very important for the depreciation. So the depreciation is a figure that we can claim back against the property devaluing in value over the years of the property ownership. So if you purchase an investment property, you only need to get that quantity surveyor report, the depreciation report, done once, and then from every year after that, your accountant will have a figure for calculating the depreciation. So generally, there's two types of depreciation: depreciation on the building itself, the physical building structure, and that's about 2.5%, or it is in fact 2.5% over the first 40 years. So if your property is 20 years old, for example, you'll be able to claim the next 20 years of a percentage, or 2.5%, sorry, of the total current building costs. And then you'll be able to claim the depreciation on the fixtures and fittings as well. So two types of depreciation, and that's a little bit of different calculation, and that'll be based on the value of the items. For generally with depreciation on the fixtures and fittings, you'll be able to claim them over about the first 10 years. So as an example, the air conditioners might have a working life of 8 years. The carpets might have a working life of 10 years. So it's light fittings, tap fittings, ceiling fans, light switches, all those sort of things we can claim as fixtures and fittings depreciation. And if you're replacing those items, so if the carpet is being replaced just ask the accountant, keep the receipts, and obviously ask the accountant, and it'll be a tax deduction as well. So I've just got a question coming through there, so I'm just going to read that out. So Tatiana's asked there, is there any other insurance involved in expenses here? So great question, Tatiana. So yes, absolutely. So the main types of insurance is the building insurance. So cover the physical building structure. And another very important insurance is called Landlords Insurance. So I'll just explain that. So the Landlords Insurance is an extra insurance that we take out to cover any loss of income from the property. So generally when the tenant will move in, they'll pay a bond, average is about 4 weeks bond. And when they move out of the property, any repairs or maintenance that the property manager organises will be deducted from that bond. Not wear and tear, but damage. If there's any more damage on top of more than what the bond will cover, that's when the landlord insurance will pay the difference. I've made claims on some of my properties over the years, and it's a great insurance. I guarantee that you need to have it. It's not an expensive insurance. I think it's somewhere between about $400 to $500 per year, so $10 a week. But it just gives you that peace of mind. If the property, I've never had a property completely trashed, but if you do have severe damage, you're always covered by that landlord's insurance. So again, the property manager there's a few companies that, and it's not a general insurance, so sometimes you have to go to a specialist that will cover that. So again, speak to your property manager about landlord's insurance. They might be able to recommend a company, and again, they could pay the figure and keep the receipt and keep all the expenses in the spreadsheet for the end of the financial year. So that insurance is very important. So hopefully that's answered that question, Tatiana. I think there's any more questions coming in. Yep. No, that's it. All good. And lastly, on the property expenses, electricity. So power. So generally, the tenant will be responsible for the power. But again, if it's a shared property or an unusual type of property, the landlord might pay the power bill. So again, it's a tax deduction. Keep receipts, but just be very clear. And if you're not really sure what's included, what's not, ask the property manager, and it'll be in the lease agreement as well. So generally, with most property, the tenant is responsible for the power bill, unless it's a shared property. Okay, so tax benefits, as I mentioned earlier, can really increase the income of the property, and you want every possible dollar from that property. So the 3 general types of deductions we can claim are the depreciation, the interest on the loan. So if you've got a principal and interest loan finance structure, you'll only be able to claim the interest portion if it's a P&I loan. So that's generally why a lot of investors go down the interest-only path if they've got debt on other properties. So for instance, if you own your own home and you've got a loan against that property, generally you'll be better off to pay interest only on the investment loan and pay a higher figure, more income that you've got off the principal place of residence, because that's a non-tax deduction. So we look at where the best way to structure that, and again, speak to your finance specialist or accountant about that, because that's very important to get that right. So it also affects depending on your strategy. So if your strategy is to borrow, keep borrowing and building your property portfolio, you might be better off with an interest-only type loan, because that'll give you more borrowing capacity, more serviceability. So if you're going to buy another property in a few years, having that minimum payment every month might be a better option to speed up the time you're going to be buying the next property. And if there's a bit of a downturn in the rent or the market, you can reduce that. Just remember, with interest-only loans, you can still pay more than the minimum. So you can set up what's called an offset account. Again, that's where a good finance specialist is absolutely critical in all of this. So having an offset loan, which means you can pay more each month, but then if you want to refinance or take some equity out of the property, you can drop the interest only, the principal part of the loan down to interest only. So that's the benefit of having interest only, but you can pay a higher than the minimum as well. So it just gives you a bit more flexibility in terms of future borrowing. But if your sole goal is to pay this property off as quickly as possible, obviously P&I and pump all the money from the tax benefits back into this property. So again, property investment is a very unique thing. As investors, we're all in a different space. We have different goals, we have different incomes, we have different portfolios. So that's why an individual plan for yourself is absolutely critical. So it's not a general rule for every investor. It's not a square box. We're all different. So you need to find out the best finance structure, the best property type for your particular situation. Depreciation of the buildings, as I mentioned previously, generally we can claim 2.5% of the building cost over the first 40 years. So past that, we can't claim any depreciation, and that can really add up over the time as well. So it's not only the income from the rental income, it's also this other deductions as well. As I mentioned earlier, depreciation on fixtures and fittings, that will be depending on the age. So if you're buying a new property or off the plan or newly built property, the tax deductions from the depreciation of the fixtures and fittings is very high, because most of those fixtures and fittings have a working life of about between 2 and sort of 10 years. And that can really add to your cash flow. And that's obviously with investors. I think the hardest part of the property investment journey is getting that first property in the first 2 or 3 years, and then you'll start to see the rental income increase, and you'll see a bit of capital growth, and the property, holding that property will become easier over time. But getting those figures initially right, so in the first 1 or 2 years, it's ticking along and covering itself, is absolutely critical. So some of the reasons why positive cash flow property will benefit your portfolio, so several reasons. So the old strategies used to be along negative gearing, claim the tax benefits, run at a loss. We are in a very different situation now, especially in the current market. So not every property market in Australia is growing in value. So we've seen some changes recently this year in terms of interest rates, and some markets are starting to slow down. So it's really important to be able to hold on to that property for the longer term, because property in all the capital cities and a lot of regional areas around Australia has performed very well over the longer term. It's a shorter term strategy that we're not too sure. We don't know on a year-to-year basis how that property is going to perform, but we know if we buy a property in a growth location, over the long term, that property is going to grow in rental income, grow in yield, and also grow in value as well. So having a positively geared property allows you to hold on to that property even if the markets are stagnant. It will also increase your borrowing capacity. So when the banks come to lend you money, they look at all your income versus all your expenses. So if that property is costing you money per week, that will reduce your borrowing capacity. If that property is positively geared, that will increase your borrowing capacity and serviceability. So again, if your goal is to build your property portfolio, then positively geared property is really going to help you in that way. So the banks are very stringent, as we know now, which has helped protect the Australian property market over many years. It's one of the best performing markets in the world over the long term, and our banks are very secure, got very good credit ratings, and they are very diligent when they lend us money in the current environment. Since the Responsible Lending Act come into play, the banks have really reduced our borrowing capacity. So it's important for us ourselves to get our income as high as possible to give that borrowing capacity. Also protects you against interest rate rises. Obviously, we've just had our first interest rate rise in many years. I don't think it's something to be scared of. I've owned property when interest rates were 18-20% and properties were still going in value. The last time we had interest rates in Australia, around that 2010-11, property prices were still growing in value in many areas. So just because interest rate rise go up doesn't mean that property prices are going to come down. So it more relies on demand and supply, and that's really the thing that's giving property investors, or has given property investors, very good returns over the last few years. We're simply not building enough properties in Australia. So one big thing is, don't listen to the media. They talk of property prices dropping 20, 30, 40%, interest rates going up 3% by the end of the year. Look at the real facts. So you can't call it the Australian property market. So Brisbane and Adelaide are a different part of the property clock than Sydney and Melbourne. So you need to understand where you're investing. If that's had 10 years of capital growth, of course that market's going to slow down. But if it's had, quite a few years of flat growth and the population's grown, you will see that capital growth. But having that positively geared property means even if interest rates climb up, which they are doing at the moment, we are going to see a few more rate rises before the end of the year. That helps cover you and protects you. It means you don't have to sell the property. You can hold on to the property because it's not going to cost you or affect your day-to-day income. Of course, it creates increases your passive income, and many property investors have retired once they've got several properties paid off, and they've actually created a passive income. So I think it's a great strategy, especially if you're at the age where you've got quite a few years to retirement. Buying one property every few years and starting to pay that off close to retirement. At retirement, you're not relying on the government funding, so you can have a passive income. So it's what many property investors strive for. But many property investors won't get past the first property because they haven't got the figures or the numbers right from day one. So they've sort of lost interest, or it hasn't gone well. They've had to sell the property, made a loss, and sort of given up on property investment. So that's why getting the figures right and speaking to professionals upfront, good property manager, good accountant, good finance specialist, and obviously a property specialist as well, will give you a much better chance of making a success of your property investment journey. And of course, having that increased income from the property may increase the resale value, especially if it's a type of property for investors. So these higher cash flow type properties where you get your likely on sale market is going to be in another investor, the higher the income yield, probably give you a higher value of the property as well. So number of reasons why positive cash flow is the way to go, and why it's important to look at all the ways and the pros and cons of every deal of the property to work out that it's going to grow in value and grow in cash flow income. So I hope that's explained the reasons and many of the benefits. So some of the ways to increase the property yield. So there's several ways. So you can look at a multiple income type property. So I've built a couple of dual income type properties, so 2 units side by side on one title. So you're getting 2 rental incomes, so a much stronger yield than a standard traditional house. That's why generally houses will give you a better income than a property with a high body corporate. So in terms of cash flow, it's not the gross yield, it's the net yield. And freestanding homes generally, not always, but generally will give you a better income. So you could buy a multiple income type property. So it could be a dual occupancy, it could be a duplex pair, it could be a block of units, it could be student accommodation, holiday accommodation, some of those other types of NDIS, I know, is a fairly recent addition to those high income type properties. So rather than buy a standard house, if cash flow is high cash flow is really important to yourself, then you need to look at those types of properties that offer that higher income. Tip number 2, restructure your finance position. Unfortunately, the banks offer new customers a much better deal than they do us as loyal existing customers. I don't think it's right. It is the way the world is. So always look at your refinancing options. So don't always look at the advertised rate on the radio or the TV or on Facebook, because sometimes those discounted low rates are only if you don't really strong borrowing capacity and putting 20% deposit and it's a house in a certain area. So look at comparable rates, and that's where a mortgage broker, I always use mortgage brokers myself because I've got access to all the different plans. The bank's policies are always changing. It's very, the finance structures can be quite confusing. So a finance specialist can look at all the different products and say, actually, you're better off to refinance. Always ask the broker though, what are the costs of breaking a loan? What are the old repayments? What are the new repayments? But the first thing I always would do or recommend is go back to your current lender and say, hey, we can get a better deal somewhere else. Are you willing to relook at our loan? I've done in the past, has worked. Even if it's not as much as the cheapest product you can find elsewhere, it's still saving money each week. So don't be afraid. The worst thing that they're going to do is say no. They want to keep your business. So if you've go and prepared though, look at what other rates are, mention that you can get a better rate somewhere else, do your homework, and then they'll show them that you're serious and you are considering leaving your current loan position. So it's not a guaranteed right structure to take, but it's always worth asking that question. So always look at whether your current loan can be restructured to a better deal. Especially in this current world where there's lots of different rates. The rates vary quite a lot from lender to lender and policy, depending on the occupation, depending on your deposit, your equity position, your LVR. So many things affect the rate that the banks will offer. It's really important to look at that figure. Modernising your property. So again, this would be a conversation if you've got a current property. with your property manager. You know, ask the question, if you're buying your next investment property, look at the current rent, look at the condition of the property. If it's been an investment property for a long time, generally they're not as well looked after as our own home, which is logical. So we're not there every day visiting the property, so it gets a bit tired and we don't notice that we're our own home. We're in there every day, so we spend obviously a lot more time and money on our own property. So when the property gets a bit tired, we might not notice, but when you're getting new tenants in, it can really make a big difference to the appeal and the rental income as well. So things, look at adding a bit of a better appearance to the property without spending a lot of money. So things like coat of internal paint, tidy up the front entranceway, new carpets. Carpets are very cost effective. So look at ways where you can modernise the property. If it's an older property you're looking at buying, look at the best yield or return you can get on that property. As an example, I just recently bought a development site for a client of mine from Sydney up here in Queensland on a larger block of land. So we're going to subdivide the property to a few blocks, but we're renovating the existing home, 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom. When I went through the property for the first inspection, noticed didn't have an ensuite, had a massive bathroom right next to the largest bedroom. So we're currently in the process of knocking the wall out, turning the current bathroom into an ensuite, and the existing laundry was quite large. So we're actually creating another bathroom in the existing laundry, and then putting laundry in a cupboard. So that's going to increase the value of the property for finance purposes. Also going to dramatically increase the rental return. Another property recently sourced, another block was a new build. It was a 3-bedroom, massive bedrooms and 2 massive lounges. So it was a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom property. Now we've added, the front living area was huge. So we've added another bedroom and made the lounge a bit smaller, still large. So now we've gone from a 3-bedroom, 3-bath to a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, and it's just rented out now. Actually, tenants moved in, $100 a week more than the previous rental estimate when we went through the purchase. So, you know, look at all the ways and what your tenant target market is going to look for. And again, that's where a property manager gives you some you know, great ideas. So modernising the home without spending, you know, a fortune on it, and look at the overall return. So look at how much it's going to cost you to modernise the property. Look at calculate the rental income increase, and then calculate over the next few years. And also, again, if you're looking to build your property or portfolio and refinance that property, modernising the property when they do the next valuation will allow you to give you a higher borrowing capacity. And the other big thing is always ask your property manager, especially if the tenant lease is coming up, and they will generally notify you. So again, the property managers are very, very busy. They manage a lot of properties. So your property is not always the top of their list. So just ask the question, you know, what is the current rents? What are the properties similar rented for in the area? Can I increase the rent? Even if it's $5 or $10 a week, $10 a week, that's $500 a year better off. And what we're seeing in some markets is because there's a shortage of rental properties in many parts of Australia, as many people will be aware, the rental increase can be quite you know, dramatic. So my office is based on the Gold Coast. I service northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland, and we're hearing rental increases of $50, $100, $150 a week increase because the market's moved that quickly and there's simply not enough investment properties around. People are offering to pay higher than the advertised rent 6 months in advance, 12 months in advance, which is great news for property investors. So again, always have a discussion about the property manager, see if there's potential to increase the rent, and the key figure that will help you point you in the right direction towards that is the vacancy rate of a suburb. So very easy to check the vacancy rate, and obviously it's very low. There's a shortage of properties. Have that discussion with your you know, property manager. So I hope that's helped. If you've got current investment properties or you're looking at your next property, really to maximise the return from that property. Okay, so this is the software program that I personally use. I use a couple of programs because it's very important to get down into the detail. So when I started property investing, you know, I used to jot the figures down on a bit of paper and calculate it. and I had a pretty good idea, but now we have technology has really improved the way we can do these calculations. So this software that I'm currently on screen is known as the Property Investment Analysis, a PIA, by Margaret Summers, and I think it's a very well developed program. I also use a live site called Real Estate Investor Property Analyzer tool. So if you'd like to see these programs or know how to access them, just put a message in the chat box, and we'll be able to email you out those details. So this is, again, I'm just using some average figures for today's demonstration. So we're looking at the purchase price of the property at $500,000, and we're using a zero deposit. So how do we do that? So this is based on the fact that we're using equity from a current property for the deposit. So essentially, excuse me, we're financing the property 100%. So using, the 80-90% loan against the investment property, and the other 10 or 20% from equity from a current property. So we're financing the property without using any of our cash, which is a great strategy for work. So purchase costs $9,600. So that's a combination of the stamp duty and the solicitor's costs. Stamp duty will vary state to state. This program actually calculates the stamp duty on the property. This example was a house and land. So with a new property with a house and land, you only pay stamp duty on the land component. So if it was a $500,000 existing property in Queensland, the stamp duty would be almost double that. So, but stamp duty, solicitor's costs, very important to take those into account. And the other purchase costs are what's known as the loan costs. So in this case, we've allowed $9,890, and that's bank valuations, application costs, loan structures. In this case, we've actually allowed for what's known as a holding cost because it's a new property. So there'll be a period where we need to pay the mortgage while there's no rental income under construction. That's why that figure is a bit higher than an existing home. So we save on the stamp duty, but we allow for a holding cost. So, and I've used a rental figure of $450 per week, which is around about the figures for that sort of property currently in Queensland. So this is a 10-year forecast. Now this page we're looking at on the screen is a summary page. So it's a 6-page report. So the other 5 pages have all the breakdowns that will show the stamp duty component, the solicitor costs, purchase costs. So this is a summary page. It's 10-year forecast, so we've even allowed for capital growth in inflation. Of course, we don't know exactly what those figures are, but it's more important to have an estimate than no idea. So we're factoring the property's going to grow in value. Capital growth in Australia over the last 50 years in most cities has averaged about 6%. Inflation running, somewhere around that 3% currently. So gross rent of $450 a week. So that gives us a gross rental income of $22,698. Mortgage payments. So again, I've allowed for an interest-only loan at 3.6%. Now, obviously, we're getting loans much lower than that, but obviously, we're going to see rate rise increases. So I've just allowed a bit higher for that reason. And again, we'll tailor that. That's why it's important to have your exact figures, because it's going to vary from investor to investor, loan to loan. But mortgage payments of $18,703 per year. So these are annual figures. Rental expenses of $7,112. So the annual rental expenses are those figures we went through earlier. So rates, insurance, property management, etc. And they'll be in the breakdown in the summary sheet. Depreciation. So as we mentioned, we can claim depreciation 2.5% over the first 40 years. So in the year 1 of this property, $10,600, and you can see that's the same for each of the next 10 years. Depreciation of the fixtures and fittings. So this is taking the value of the fixtures and fittings within that. So this is a freestanding standalone home, around about standard 4-bedroom home, around about $25,000. Again, you'll get a depreciation report by a quantity surveyor, and your accountant will be able to calculate these deductions. So in year 1, 3,800, year 2, 4,700. So you can see, very important to get those, look at those tax deductions, because they can really add to your income of the property. Loan costs, as we described there, and loan costs are a tax deduction over the first 5 years. So that's where you can see we can claim that figure back, which is great. So that's one of the benefits of investment property, we get great income, we get the capital growth and the gearing of that property. We also get great tax deductions as well. So using a, just move my screen around, just bear with me for a minute. This is based on a single person with a taxable income of 70,000. So based on that income and those expenses, in this scenario, this client will get a tax refund of about 7,000 in year 1, 7,000 year 2, and it drops off year 3, 4, and 10. So as you can see, very, very strong. So 7,000 in year 1, what's that, around $120, $130 per week on top of your rental income, massive difference. So including the tax refund, this property is $75 a week positively geared. So, you know, and that's fully funded 100%. So great figures, but you can see the importance of taking all the income and all the income expenses into account. And then year 2, year 3, year 5, year 10, $96 a week. So pretty consistent over the next 10 years. We know comfortably on those figures that's going to be in a positively geared type property. And then we can use that $75 a week to pump back into our other income, or if we're simply looking to pay the property off as fast as possible, we can pump that back into an offset loan on this property, or go and P&I on the loan structure. So we can do the calculation both ways. So that's the importance of having a calculator and the software, the information that we can actually calculate, you know, the property very, very accurately before we jump in the car and inspect the property. We've done a calculation and we pretty much know up front what that property is, how that property is going to perform in terms of cash flow. And that's the net cash flow, net yield after all the expenses, the income versus expenses, which is a great position to be in. So that's one of the benefits of property. Even though it's positively geared, we're not actually paying tax because of all those non-cash deductions that we can claim, like the depreciation. So anyone new to property investment, that's some of the reasons why many investors will prefer property. And that's why the banks, you know, are lending us as investors up to 90% to buy this property. But if we're looking at another asset class, they're not going to lend us 90%, much, much lower. So they've got confidence in the property and the market and understand the long-term growth. So that's known as a PIA software. I also have a live program I use as well. And that way you can put the figures in and you can test a few different scenarios and get the best finance structure, the best cash flow outcome. So for my clients that I prepare looking at properties, if it's an investment property, we always do this PIA, and then we can show the client that it's going to cover itself if this is the correct case. And that's why, as an investor, when we see our advertised yield, we really need to know the yield based on our situation, our income, our purchase price, our finance structure. All that's going to affect, excuse me, the return of the property. Okay, so that was the initial, webinar on how to calculate the cash flow and all those benefits, and also all those incomes and expenses we need to be aware of. We are actually holding another webinar on Thursday, the 16th of June. So in a couple of weeks' time, same time. So in that webinar, we're going to cover more of those high yielding type properties. So if your go-to is high cash flow and you want to understand the types of properties and the benefits of those properties, love to see you on board on that following Thursday. So we're going to cover a bit more detail. We're going to go into specific properties, show some of those high income property types, and also have the cash flows associated with those properties.
Put the link in the chat.
Okay, great. So Lisa's just mentioned the link for the next webinar is in the chat box. So if you go on there, there's a hyperlink. For any of those watching tonight that are based in Sydney, I know a few are. Great news, we are coming down to Sydney to host a live event on the 25th of June at Ridges Parramatta. So that's a Saturday afternoon at 2 p.m. So we booked that because it's free parking on site, so it's easy to get in and out of. So we've got a lot of existing clients down in Sydney, a lot of inquiries from our Sydney database looking to invest in northern New South Wales and Queensland. And they really want to know what's happening in the current market up here. We're in a very different position than Sydney and Melbourne in terms of growth and income and yields and time in our property clock. So we're going down there to share the information, meet everyone in person. So the event will be on a Saturday afternoon, so more convenient, on-site parking. And we're also holding one-on-one appointments. So if you can't make the event or after the event, we're going to be in Sydney for a few days. So if you'd like to book a one-on-one meeting after that to discuss your situation and if we can help you in terms of sourcing property, whether it's to live in up here or for investment, happy to book a one-on-one strategy call. So it's an information afternoon. We'll be covering all the growth, statistics, population growth, vacancy rates, property types, obviously the cash flow, and we'll actually be having some properties, handpicked properties available on the afternoon. So the link for that live event is in the chat box. So Lisa, thank you, Lisa. So you'll be able to click on the hyperlink and book in, and love to see if you're based in Sydney there and have a chat and find out what's happening in the market up here. If you're not in Sydney or you can't make the event and you'd like to discuss a bit more detail about cash flows, if you've got a current investment property and you're not sure the cash flow, I am more than happy to run a cash flow analysis and provide you with a PIA like you saw on screen. So if you've got a property or you're looking at property and you're really not sure how the cash flow or how to calculate it, welcome just to send me a message in the chat box or drop us an email.
Put a link in.
Oh, okay, Lisa put a link in. Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, happy to do a cash flow forecast on your specific property. So no problem. If you would like a chat about how we operate, help clients, or any questions about property investment, or need help with a property manager or accountant up here, yeah, we'd love to have a chat. So you can book a strategy call in. If you work during the day, we can make it after hours. I work evenings, obviously, and Saturdays as well, showing clients property. So yeah, happy to book in a quick discussion about if we can help you or answer any questions that you've got available. We have a large database, so we email the content out. So tips for property investors, homeowners, how to get started, how to restructure your finance, what's happening in the market, some of the questions to ask a property manager. So we do regular content. We have a Top Tips Tuesday every Tuesday, so information for property investors. So if you're on our mailing list, you'll get those top tips via text or email. So if you're not in our database and you'd like to be up to date with what's happening in the property market, please just type your email address. We don't have everyone's email address in currently. So if you'd like to receive our market updates, we also quite often do property of the week. So if we've got a very unique or special property, we'll list it on our, send it out to our clients as well. So if you'd like to be aware of that.
If they got the email for this event, they're on that mailing list.
Okay, so if you received an email about the event tonight, you would be already on the database. But yeah, if you're not sure, just drop in the chat box your name and email, and we'll make sure that you are on our database and you get those emails. So we do them about once or twice a week, and just providing content, information, and you know, the true facts of what's happening in the property market. Again, a lot of what you hear in the media is really not factual and blow things out of proportion, and it's very sad because it stops a lot of people moving forward when they're not really relaying the true facts of the market. And just remember, Australia is a big country. Our states are very far apart, and they're really at different parts of the property market. So whether you're investing in Tasmania or Perth or Adelaide, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, they're all at different parts of the property clock. So you need to understand what part of the cycle that particular market is. And if you're living in that area and you need some strong capital growth in the shorter term and that market's not on the plateau part of the cycle, then you need to look at other locations. So that's why we do all the research for our clients and look at what's happening right around Australia. Okay, so we're going to get right into the Q&A. So I'm just going to grab a quick glass of water and then I'm going to get right into it. So thank you everyone for attending tonight. Hope everyone's got some value or learned some tips out of property investing and enjoyed the content. I'd love to hear your feedback of how you found the event tonight. We are having another webinar with a bit more detail, as I mentioned a couple of in a few weeks. So we're just going to go into the chat box.
That's me. That's shots.
The questions.
Yeah, no, there isn't.
Okay, so the chat box.
You can make them talk live if they want to.
Yeah, okay. So if anyone's got any questions, you're welcome to turn on your speaker and ask live questions. Just to fresh. The next webinar will be on high cash flow type properties that we've got coming up or available. And they're very unique. They're generally off-market type properties, and they'll give you a stronger yield than a traditional house. If you've got an existing property, and as I mentioned, and you'd like to, know the cash flow of the property and how it is performing in real time, happy to do a cash flow forecast of an existing property.
Oh, Tatiana, and she's taken an audio off too.
Okay. Hey Jeff, how are you?
Very good, thank you. Yourself?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm just curious to know, I've been talking to a few property investors or strategists. So basically what they come up with is probably they attract most of the clients saying, once you buy an investment property and say it's positively geared, you can continue doing the same thing, like create a portfolio. Like if you want, you can add a property each year. I just want to understand, is that really possible?
It really comes down to a few things, Tatiana. So it's a very hard question to answer without knowing the specific situation. Buying a property every 12 months really. What type of property are you looking at? Is it a standard house or a high cash flow type
Standard
property?
house. So say like roughly around 500K properties. And my income, both partners put together around 200K, and nothing changes much, but you still have a positively geared property, say putting $100 a week or something, and grows up by equity, let's assume probably 60 to 100K a year. Is it possible to basically pick up the second property showing that you're getting an income of whatever over the years as a rent plus, with your current scenario, like your salary and other things?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there's two main things they look at when they lend you the money for the next property will be the borrowing capacity or the serviceability. So that's all the income coming in. So your salaries plus your positively geared property. So that it needs to qualify on the borrowing capacity side. And the other thing is the deposit. So it needs to have either equity growth in the new investment property that you're borrowing, but if you don't have enough equity in that, you can use equity if you've got current equity from your own principal place of residence. So if you've got quite a lot of equity, and obviously that's a very good combined income and without a lot of other debt, yeah, absolutely. Generally, if it's your first property and it's highly geared at 90%, and depends what it really grows by. If it only grows by a limited amount, it's going to be pretty tough in the first 12 months. But if you've got high income and you've already got equity from another property and the property is covering itself, the banks, because is it a built property or to be built property?
It's a built property. So
yeah. Okay. So once you've owned it, and if it's in a market that's growing up in value, so you've got the equity growth plus the bank have got a record of the rental income over the last 12 months. Yeah, there's no reason why you can't.
So in this case, basically the banks are going to consider the rent as the complete rent as a serviceability. Is it?
No. So generally, this is where you need to speak to a good finance specialist, depending on the lender, but generally I think they take about 80% of the income. So they don't take the 100%.
Okay. So yeah, I get it. So
yeah, so it might be,
of my property grows up in equity by 200K or 300K a year, if I don't have the serviceability, basically they're not going to lend me the money.
Correct. Yeah, so it needs to qualify on both. But if you've got high income and you don't have a lot of other debt, and you're a salaried position, you're in a pretty strong position. But again, you won't know that till the property gets revalued. And just remember, when the banks do the valuation for finance purposes, they're generally under what the market value is anyway. So the banks are very conservative for borrowing purposes. So that might have a factor as well. But again, your finance specialist will be able to calculate that when you're considering, like at the time, what the value growth is of the property and what your current income and expenses are, and then do that. But yeah, absolutely. I think, there's a lot of books written on 10 properties in 10 years. That's very hard once you start building several properties. I've got a client at the moment, and she's got quite a number of properties, and on paper she's very, very positively geared. But when the banks look at, they don't like the fact that there's so many properties with so much debt. Even though the LVR is not that high, they just are very wary of that. So they've made some changes. So if it's your first or second investment property, yeah, it's not too bad. But once you get above that, the banks, that's where a good finance specialist is really critical, because they, you might be better off having, and in the past I've always had loans with different lenders as well.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is if you get turned down by lender A, you've already got a relationship with lender B,
Okay, cool.
So,
Timothy's got a question.
okay. So I hope that's answered that question. And you asked about is there any restriction on the age of the house to claim depreciation? So the depreciation on the building structure is for the first 40 years. So once it's over 40 years, you can't claim depreciation on the building side of it. Depreciation on the fixtures and fittings is generally, as I mentioned, about the first 10 to 12 years, depending on the actual item. But again, if a depreciation report will be able to do that. Timothy asked, what suburbs in Brisbane do you recommend? So that would be an individual question, Timothy, based on your borrowing capacity or affordability. So most of Southeast Queensland's going very strong, but there's quite a big difference in the median price between different suburbs. So it depends on your price point, is where that would be guided. And the good news about Brisbane is the vacancy rates are very, very low right around Southeast Queensland. So not enough rental properties, and there's a real shortage. So good news for property investors. So if you want to have a discussion, Timothy, about those suburbs based on your position, welcome to drop me a message, and or book a strategy call, and happy to answer that.
Hey Jeff, a quick one. So we just recently heard there was an earthquake somewhere in Southeast Queensland, from Caboolture to somewhere in. So will that basically affect the hype which is going on? Because I've been talking to builders and they're going crazy there. The land is not yet developed. They are doing the development probably middle of next year or end of next year, but they're asking for indefinite, non-refundable deposit.
Yeah, so I would be, and I do a lot of new construction for clients. I've built new myself, and the market up here is, you're absolutely right, it is really crazy, and there's some really unreasonable terms. And I'm just, a lot of developers and even sellers now will ask for unconditional contracts. I think you've got to be very careful of that, because the downside is that if you go unconditional and then the land, it's not so bad if the land is registered, in the next few months, but if they're saying the end of the year, generally we're finding delays because the market is so hot up here. So if the registration gets delayed, and then your finance is expired, and then you've got to go through a new finance extension. And also in terms of the build contract, so I do a lot of turnkey fixed price build contracts. And of course, of values and property prices rising, you've got to be careful that the build contract, if it's that far away, will rise. It's not always a bad thing, because what we're finding in the current market is by the time you've gone settled on the land, you've already made a profit. The equity is already there. And the value of the build, even if the build contract's gone up a bit, the value of the comparable sales is higher anyway. But I'm just, a case in point is I built a house and land for my daughter on the Gold Coast. Within 12 months she refinanced, and made 150K on a bank valuation in 12 months, which is pretty pretty good. But that was the Gold Coast. So if you're looking at, I know that area quite well, but I'm always trying to look at conditional contracts, and it depends on the developer. So some are quite flexible, and they'll give you finance extensions. Some aren't, but just be a bit wary if the registration and who the developer and builder is as well. So I've got a few under construction for clients at the moment and not having any issues, but I have had other developers, and I know because the market is so strong, a lot of them are demanding unconditional contracts, and that would if you're in a very strong position, you know, and you sort of have a bank pre-approval and you're not going to have any issue with the refinance, not so risky. But if you're right on the 90% and you're right on the limit, you don't have any spare cash to put in, you really want a conditional contract. But yeah, I'm happy to speak to you off book call at some point and cover that in detail.
Sure.
So hope it's
yeah. Thanks so much, Jeff. Yeah, probably I'll meet you around in Sydney once you're here.
Perfect. Look forward to it. Yeah, it'd be great. Yeah, we'll be coming down. So we're that's why the market up here is very strong for anyone else listening tonight. And I think it's not just Brisbane, you know, a lot of areas around Australia where sellers have really had the call on the play and some really, really unreasonable terms. So it is the state of the market. We can't change the market. The good news is in a strong market, you know, you're getting that equity growth faster. And Brisbane is a case of that. But the other side of the coin is you've got to be really sharp when you're doing your numbers and look at the contracts. And also in a strong market, you need to make decisions pretty quickly because the market is moving. But yeah, as a general, for most investors, I prefer a conditional contract.
Yeah, true.
All good. Okay, well, that seems to have Kim. Okay, Kim said thanks, great webinar, easy to understand. Thanks, Kim, appreciate that. Okay, looking for the next one. Oh, thanks for
that question.
Okay, thanks,
What
Kim.
needs to be considered when looking at the numbers?
Oh, yeah, okay. Easy to understand the breakdown of what needs to be considered when looking at numbers. Yes, absolutely. So I'm glad it's covered in a lot of detail. As I mentioned, from my very first property purchase many years ago, I was always looking at the numbers, and before we had software programs and the technology, it was just a matter of writing the figures down and understand the cash flow. So you can, you know, rest at night that you're going to buy this property, it's going to rent for around this, and you know it's going to cover itself. So with the software that they've got nowadays, it makes it really accurate. But again, rental incomes, a couple of words of caution if you're looking at new property. Look at the rental figure quoted really, really closely. So you want to see what other comparable market rents. So if it's off the plan type development, you just got to make sure what the rental demand, so the vacancy rate is really critical, and also that the rate that's being quoted is correct. And also when you go to your lender, as I mentioned earlier, generally the lenders won't take 100% of the rental income as well. So if you're relying on that rental income for your borrowing capacity, it might be a bit reduced because generally the banks will take under the current advertised rent. Pros and cons, it has protected again to talk about, you know, property prices collapsing and all that. The banking industry is very secure, very safe, and it is quite tough if anyone's tried to borrow money recently. I bought my last purchase we settled in November, and yeah, I've never seen the bank so diligent on everything. So yeah, makes it harder to borrow, reduces our borrowing capacity, but again, it helps protect the property market. So you know, and again, you know, this talk of property prices collapsing, the banks are still lending us 90% on our investment properties. I've got first-time buyers that are borrowing up to 95%. So they wouldn't be doing that if they thought the market was going to drop by that 20 or 30%. So certainly we'll see some higher end properties and those really unique different properties could see large drops, but the average house in the average suburb is, I think over the longer term, is not going to see too much dramatic changes. So so thank you guys for the feedback. Again, I hope everyone's enjoyed the session. Really enjoyed presenting the information tonight. Look forward to our webinar in 2 weeks' time, and if you are based in Sydney, I'd love to see you when we're down on the Saturday the 25th of June, or if you'd like to have a discussion before then about your position or any information that we discussed tonight, happy to have that meeting booked. And so we'll be, as mentioned, we recorded the session tonight, so as long as the technology works well, we'll save that and we'll send an email out tomorrow. So if you haven't registered for the event through Meetup, we don't always have your email address. So just before we wrap the webinar up, if you wouldn't mind, just if you like that information, just
I've got everyone's email.
Oh, okay, we've got, apparently Lisa said we were all under control with that. So thank you. So we're just over the hour now, which is great. So again, hope everyone's got some value out of the session. And okay, thanks, Dave. Thanks for the feedback. You're more than welcome. And I love providing information and sharing and the benefits when you get the figures right of property investing. So good luck with your property investing journey, and have a great evening, and hope to see you on our next recording or webinar.
Thank you very much. Great seminar. And very good organized, very well organized. I love all the reminders. Yeah. Very well organized.
Okay, yeah, it's a process, and someone else mentioned that as well. It's just because I know we're all busy, right? We get tied up with things, but thank you for the feedback, because it's good to hear that the information has been helpful and explained it in a bit of a breakdown that we can all understand and get some benefit, more importantly, out of.
Well, thanks, Jeff, because this is more like personal level, and it's not like you're not like the hundreds who are out there. You have 10 minutes to subscribe, pay $100. We are charging $5,000, and you got 1 hour to do $100, and you'll have lifetime and things like that crap. So it's really personal, and we can understand what your motivation is. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to meet you, and it's something different. And
awesome. Okay,
thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I've learned a lot over the years of property investing. I know one thing, for any tip for any young people getting into property investment, I had to sell my properties, moving countries and start again. If I could go back, hold on to your properties, get positively geared, and just hold on to them for the long term. So my circumstances changed a few times, and I had to sell and start again. But it's a real big benefit of holding property. And you see most successful property investors have just built those property portfolio up over time and held on to those properties, because of the population growth in Australia, and the forecasts are very strong, over the next few decades. And there's limited land that we can build on where people want to live in the capital cities. That's a real positive for those that get into, property investment. That's why I love helping people onto the property investment journey. Okay, good night, everyone, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, Jeff. Have a good one.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, Jeff, see you in Sydney.
Yep, look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, give me a call. Bye.